Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us for First Person Conversations with Holocaust Survivors. I'm Bill Benson, and I have hosted First Person for the past 25 years. Each month, we bring you firsthand accounts of survival during the Holocaust. Each of our first person guests is a volunteer at the museum. Please send us any question you have and let us know where you are watching from in the live chat. We are honored to have Holocaust survivor Ernie Brod share his firsthand account of survival with us. Ernie, thank you for joining us and for agreeing to be our first person.
It's nice to be with you, Bill.
Ernie, you have a great deal to share with us in a very short 1 hour period, so we'll go ahead and get started. Ernie, your parents, Israel and Pepi, met in 1930 in Vienna, Austria. They married in 1932 and had your brother Manfred in 1934. Please tell us what you can about your parents.
My mother was born in Poland, was brought to Vienna as a child just before World War One. She has an older sister, 1 year older sister, Anna, and a much younger sister, Francie. The family was affluent. My mother attended Vienna University for 3 years and until the atmosphere for Jews was not conducive for her to continue. My father, Israel, came from a very different background, also born in Vienna. He was among the youngest of 10 or 11 children and came to Vienna to study. His background was very different from my mother's.
In terms of that, he came from a less affluent background, for starters, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Since they came from such large differences in terms of their backgrounds, to your knowledge, did that impact their relationship in any way?
I think my mother would have been able to introduce my father into levels of life that would not otherwise have been available
Mhm.
to him. I think together they led a rather glamorous life in those few years of their marriage before everything changed.
I think you described to me in a conversation that their marriage was quite the event in Vienna when it occurred.
It was a very high level social event, Vienna's finest, certainly within the Jewish population there, which is so assimilated, would have attended.
Mhm.
And that picture shows, I think, the kind of wedding it must have been.
Yeah, that's a terrific photo we just saw of your both your parents before their wedding, and then of course their wedding photo that we saw a moment ago. Your father had moved to Vienna to pursue either an academic career or to become a rabbi, but he ended up working in the movie industry. Tell us why he made that change.
He had very much wanted to be a doctor, but it became clear that Jews were no longer going to be accepted into the medical profession. So he switched and got a PhD in biology and was presumably looking forward to an academic career. But the family business beckoned, and there would have been, I think, pressure from my grandfather, his father-in-law, to join the family business, and he did.
And this family business, this movie business, the family owned Lux Films. Tell us more about the movie business in Austria and their business itself.
Yes, my grandfather's younger brother had started a movie business in Vienna. He had been to the US and had gotten very excited about the early years of movies. But his business started to founder and was on the verge of bankruptcy at one point. And my grandfather and another brother, who was a lawyer, were forced to jump in and take over the business. It was reasonably successful releasing films from Germany and showing them in theaters in Vienna, some of which they owned. But the business really took a step forward when they decided to start showing talking movies in the theaters. There had been a dispute among the brothers. The lawyer brother had said, the citizens of Vienna will never stand for all that noise in the theaters. But my grandfather overruled him, and the business grew from there.
We have an image I'd like you to tell us just a little bit about here.
This is one of the playbills of one of the early and possibly first of the talking movies that they showed. There are several playbills online reflecting the Lux Films business in the uh, late 1920s and early 1930s.
Mhm. Your brother Manfred was born in 1934. What can you tell us about his early childhood?
Manfred would have had a placid, normal life for a small child of an upscale family. There were parks nearby that they would have taken him to. And then, of course, big changes came when he was 3.5 years old.
And of course, that was early March 1938, just weeks before your birthday. Nazi Germany took over Austria in what is called the Anschluss. Please tell us what the Anschluss was and what that meant for your family.
Yes, the Germans marched into Vienna in March of 1938. They were welcomed with open arms by an adoring public. Uh, Revisionist history now calls it an invasion of Austria.
Mhm.
So the Nazis took control of everything they needed to as they moved into Austria. And one of the major goals was putting their arms around the organs of communications and propaganda to make sure that they had total control. So what were those organs at that time? There was no television. Even radio was in its early days, and it was mostly people playing music and reading from scripts. It really was not a source of information for the most part. So there were newspapers and there were the movies.
Mhm.
And the movies through 10-minute features, movie tone news and news of the world showed what was called newsreels before or after almost all the movies that were shown. This was people's only way of experiencing visually what was going on in the world. So the Nazis took control of Lux Films. They used excuses such as tax issues and so on. In conjunction with taking control of the firm, they arrested all the men. So my grandfather and his two brothers and my father, the men from that company, were all taken to prison.
And now had complete control over the movie business that your family had owned up till that point. Yeah.
Yes.
Ernie, before we go on, I'd like you to know that we have people that are listening to you today, watching you from all over the country and indeed from other places in the world. We have people with us today from North Carolina, Iowa, California, and we have students in the Fairmont Heights High School in Maryland. And I'd also like to welcome our international viewers watching in places like Canada and Malta today. So thank you all for joining Ernie today for his first person program. Ernie, around the time of your birth on April 7th, 1938, your father was in prison, as you described to us, leaving your mother with you, a newborn, and your 4-year-old brother Manfred. Do you know how your mother was feeling at the time, and was she able to be in touch with your father since he was in prison?
It was a doubly or triply difficult time for my mother. She had had a difficult childbirth and had broken an ankle in the process. Life was becoming more and more difficult as the Nazis introduced more and more rules and regulations to make life harder. And her husband was in prison. There was communication. There were letters back and forth, and my mother was able to occasionally visit my father in prison. Initially, my father's letters were fairly optimistic about his ability to get out in the near future, but as time went by and that wasn't happening, his letters became more depressive.
Ernie, would you be willing to read to us from one of your father's letters to your mother?
Yes, my father wrote, "My dear child, I see from your cards what trouble and stress you are undergoing and how difficult it is for you. Alas, I can do nothing to help. We can do nothing but wait. Manfred will soon be thinking less of me. Please encourage him in this. It is very sad for me to have to write something like this, but it's a matter of the children's health. That I hold you dear is understood. You are my world, my life, yes, and even more. What still gives me the strength to exist is you and the children. It is so terribly tragic that I have not gotten to know Anstey properly. Dear, don't doubt whatever happens. You must live and hold out. I will also try. You have taken over a responsibility towards the children, but keep me in your loving remembrance. Kiss the children for me and let me embrace you. Many kisses, your Papa." His term of endearment.
That's a painful letter to read. Thank you for your willingness to do that, Ernie. And your mother, of course, as you said, wrote to your father as well. Will you read to us from one of the postcards that she sent to your father?
Yes, dearest Iju, her nickname for him. You will be wondering why I am writing today. Tomorrow you will get the 3 shirts, 2 collars, and 2 pairs of underpants. I washed them with love. I would be spoiling you if you were at home, but hopefully I will soon be able to do it in reality. We are well. Everyone finds the baby charming, and Manfred much grown, almost a big boy. The baby laughs a lot and sweetly, and in spite of our mood, we have to laugh. May God grant that you will soon be back with me and the children. The children are now our comfort. Many kisses, your Pepi.
Again, Ernie, thank you for reading that. Just those two short notes to each other, the love in them for each other and the love for the family really comes through very powerfully. Ernie, your father's arrest motivated your mother to take action. Just a month after your birthday, she applied for a visa to leave Austria. This was a very complex process. What do you know about what it was like for her to do that?
It was just about the first thing she did when she could awaken from childbirth. She signed up with the American consulate for a visa. You can see from this receipt that the 4 that she signed up for herself, her husband, her 2 children, were numbers 11,987, 88, 89, and 90. In other words, nearly 12,000 people had signed up before she did, and she had moved rather quickly. You can see people lining up here in front of a police station. One of the earliest uh, parts of applying for a visa was to get a waiver from the local police department. There were many other documents that had to be gotten with great trouble and inconvenience, working with uncooperative uh, German officials at these various offices. Uh, but those were the steps that had to be taken if you were to have any hope of being granted a visa to America under the very tight quota policy that America had for numbers of refugees that would be allowed into the country from various countries in Europe.
Ernie, I want to take the liberty of just repeating something you said. Your mother applied for that visa. It wasn't long after the Nazis took control of Austria, yet, as you said, there were already almost 12,000 people in line for that visa ahead of you and the family. Astonishing. While your grandfather and uncles were eventually released from prison, your father was not. Several months later, in July 1938, your mother learned that your father died while in prison. Tell us how your mother learned this.
It was a very painful way. First, the letters stopped, and my mother was in a panic. She went to the prison to see if she could find out what was going on, and she was told, "He's not here," and nothing more than that. It was not a good sign, but not yet definitive. She went home, and within a day or two, she received a circular in the mail from a florist offering her flowers to put on his grave. And that was the first real indication that he was dead. Right after that came an official death certificate, which listed the cause of death as suicide. Now we know the Nazis employed that excuse for many deaths that happened in their custody over the years. But at that point, it's not impossible that my father took his life. There was no way to ever be sure.
Right. Ernie, I want to allow something that you said really sink in, that your mother was panicked, worried about why she wasn't hearing from him. He wasn't at the jail, but yet the first notice she got was an advertisement from a florist for flowers for his grave before she got the official notice. That is somewhere between horrifying and unbelievably cruel.
Yes.
How was it that your grandfather and uncles were able to get out of prison, but not your father?
Well, we think they probably bribed the jailers. They were an older generation, knew their way around better than my father. And they probably figured out uh, how to get out. There were still pieces of the company that had not been taken over by the Nazis, particularly pieces of the company that were joint ventures overseas. And probably they bartered those additional pieces of the company for their release and their freedom.
Mhm. Following the death of your father, do you know how your mother was able to manage to be able to pay her bills and to feed you and Manfred? How did she get by?
It was an increasingly difficult time. Life became closed in by all the Nazi rules and laws. Life was also perilous. Just going out in the street, you could be hit, beaten, spit upon.
Mhm.
Police did nothing to help. Often they participated themselves. Jews were not allowed to do so many things. She would not have been allowed to enter public buildings to go into various parks and so on. So life for her with the two children must have been nearly impossible and near miraculous that she was able to navigate that for a while.
Yeah. And of course, while trying to navigate all of that, she was focused on what she could do to get the three of you, Manfred, and herself, out of Austria. And in doing so, she learned about the Kindertransport and made the exceptionally profound decision to send Manfred on his own to England. Tell us about the Kindertransport and how your mother was able to get Manfred included on one of them.
The Kindertransport was devised by international Jewish organizations. They got the approval of the British government to admit 10,000 children into England, and not one more than that. The parents in Vienna and Berlin and Prague, other cities where the Kindertransport also operated, had to make these excruciating decisions about whether to try to go forward with their child or to ensure the child's safety, but sending the child off to be separated for who knows how long into a country that would have been strange to those children. My mother was one of those people and made that excruciating decision and placed my brother on a Kindertransport to England in the fall of 1939.
I think you shared with me that Manfred would have been one of the youngest children to go on the Kindertransport.
Yes, the age limit was 4, and Manfred was just a few months beyond that. But there could be a younger child if there were an older sibling
Mm.
along. So a very small number of the children were less than 4 years old.
So your mother makes this extraordinary decision. Manfred leaves for England, and of course, your mom, as you said, didn't know how long it would be before she saw him again, or if she would ever see him again. Do you know if she was able to be in touch with him or to communicate with the foster parents that he went to in England?
Yes, the arrangements at that time, particularly in the first few months before war broke out with England, allowed letters to go back and forth. So my mother actually heard from the couple, the volunteer couple who had taken Manfred in Manchester, England, and she at least knew that he was safe and settled. And for a while, there was additional correspondence for her to see how he was getting on.
Mhm. During that time, with your mother struggling to make ends meet with you, did her dad and her uncles who had been released from prison, were they able to provide any support?
I don't think so. That they were struggling with their own attempts to emigrate. My grandfather eventually was able to leave and get to Palestine, as it was then called. One great uncle, went to Shanghai, where so many refugees went. Another to South America. Um, the help that my mother got, I think, was mostly from her kid sister, Francie.
Mhm.
Francie had married a Hungarian man and lived out the war in Budapest. It helped that she was blonde and looked Aryan. And she made, I think, a couple of perilous trips into Vienna to be with my mother and bring her provisions and funds to live.
So she was able to at least get that support from her sister. Ernie, before I go on, I'd like to remind our audience to please share your questions for Ernie in the chat feature that we have. Please put those questions forward if you would. And I want to welcome another group of students that are watching from the Sunnyside School District in Tucson, Arizona. And I'd like to share a comment from a viewer named Rosa. Rosa writes, "It is a privilege to listen to you, Ernie. Thank you for sharing your experiences." So that's from Rosa.
So nice. Thank you.
Ernie, after Manfred's departure on the Kindertransport in August 1939, the Nazis began to round up and deport the Jews of Vienna. Your mother continued to seek a way to leave Austria over the next year as life became increasingly unbearable. You and your mother were ordered to report to a place the Nazis used as a holding facility. What was this facility and what happened after you arrived there?
Yes, the Nazis had been trying to decide what to do with the Jews of Vienna. For those who were able to leave, that was fine with the Nazis. But for others, they decided to round them up, as you said. The encampments that were used were in the buildings that had housed Jewish schools, which of course had been closed. So there was my mother and me at age 1.5, no, 2.5, it would have been. And again, there were two ways to be released from the encampment. If you could show a reasonable possibility that you could emigrate, that you could get a visa, you had the legal right to leave. Now, legal rights with the Nazis didn't necessarily mean that Jews really could take advantage of whatever little was given to them. The Nazis always were able to make their own decisions. So the guards could decide that a document which my mother had was insignificant and ignore it or put her at the end of a line. They had the ability to do whatever they wanted.
Mm.
But my mother had an application for a visa, which she showed. And as the story goes, me, having been a colicky infant, started to cough and sneeze and make horrible noises. And the guard said to my mother, "Get him out of here before he infects everyone. Take him to a doctor." And that was miracle number one. My mother left with me, and instead of going to a doctor, went right to the American consulate.
And that's where a second miracle took place, right?
In that consulate, there was the visa for us to go to America. Here's the document. Strangely, in the upper right, it says Vienna, Germany. It's not that people didn't know their geography. It's that the Germans considered Austria just a part of Germany to be closed within that country. Also down below and on the other side, there's language that would never appear in a document of this era. It required the sponsor for the people coming in to swear and guarantee that they are not morons or idiots, other unpleasant words. But this was the key document toward getting the visa.
Ernie, sort of as an aside, but I can't help this. Between that last photo we saw of you with a stuffed animal and your photo on this application for a visa, I think everybody viewing would agree that you were one heck of an adorable kid.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, I guess.
Eventually, your mother obtained the necessary affidavit, which, with the visa, allowed the two of you to leave Austria. Tell us what an affidavit was and how your mother was able to obtain one.
Yes, the American government, isolationist at the time, not unlike today's world, very anti-immigration, established quotas for refugees to come into the country. The quotas were larger for countries that had people that Americans were more comfortable with, like Western and Northern Europe, England, France, Scandinavia, and so on. The quotas became lower and more difficult as you worked your way across Europe to Central and Eastern Europe to countries which had more Jews. So there needed to be uh, a sponsor for people who would have a visa. The sponsor had to show that he or she had enough money in the bank to guarantee that the immigrants would not become a financial burden on the American government. It was not an easy process for the sponsor. Much paperwork had to be taken care of. We had a sponsor, miracle number 2 or 3. The sponsor, whose name was Chaim Rothenberg, was a brother-in-law of my mother's. He was 23 years older than my mother, and I'm not sure that they were even aware of each other. The way he was a brother-in-law of my mother's is that he was my mother's husband's sister's husband. My father had a much older sister, a generation older, who emigrated from Poland to the United States before the Nazis, found her way to a community in Brooklyn called Brighton Beach, met Chaim Rothenberg, married him, and together they raised 3 children. Then she passed away, leaving Chaim Rothenberg without a woman in his life.
And your mother's other sister played a role, then a really important role in connecting you to Chaim Rothenberg and getting the affidavit, right?
Yes, Anna had married a man with a Polish passport, managed to get out a year or two before all of this, found her way to Brighton Beach in Brooklyn, and knew that there was this distant relative there. And she made it her business to befriend Chaim Rothenberg and to persuade him that he should be the sponsor. And as an added incentive, uh, showed him that the immigrant woman was an attractive younger woman. And if things worked out, perhaps they would marry. And in fact, things worked out and they married.
And we'll come back to that.
And my uncle, my mother's brother-in-law, of course, was my uncle. My uncle became my stepfather. There we are when I was about 8 or 9 years old. My mother was 39, but I think she looks older in that picture. My stepfather was 62, and I think he looks younger. In my mind's eye, they were not a mismatched couple. You see us outside the tiny bungalow that we lived in, and this backyard, which we're standing in, was not much larger than what you see.
Ernie, before we move on from there, I'm going to take you back just a little bit. Once Chaim Rothenberg was able to provide the affidavit, so now your mother with you, she has the visa, she has the affidavit, she has the passports. That meant she could leave Vienna and leave Austria. Tell us what you know about how she got to the United States before she actually met Chaim. How did she make it to the US with you?
Well, even with the right to the visa, the process was again complex and expensive. She had to pay a hefty departure tax to Vienna, and we have the passports for her and for me. And from turning the pages, we can follow the journey from Vienna into France and out of France and into Spain and out of Spain and into Portugal, which was a neutral country at the time. And then, after a wait of a couple of days, boarding a ship called the Serpa Pinto, which became famous for ferrying thousands of refugees from war torn Europe to America.
Even though this was February 1941, the US was not in the war, Portugal was a neutral country, taking a ship across the Atlantic was still a perilous adventure, right?
It was Nazi U-boats, submarines were sending torpedoes out, and they managed to bring down and sink a number of ships during that period of time. So the Serpa Pinto was fortunate to be able to make so many voyages safely through those dangerous waters. I have no recollection of that uh, voyage. I'm not sorry that I have no recollection of Vienna, but I do wish I remembered at least the part of that voyage when the Statue of Liberty appeared. But we were on that ship and made it to Ellis Island, and from Ellis Island to Brighton Beach. 3 weeks later was my third 3-year-old birthday, and that's my first memory. Uh, I have some recollection of my cousins and my aunt and uncle and this older uncle of mine, something of a birthday celebration and a celebration of our survival.
And as you described to us, of course, your mother got to know Chaim, and they eventually married, and he became your stepfather. Um, what was that like for you?
It was very strange. I had an unusual family for Brooklyn of the 1940s, much more conservative kind of time. Families consisted of a father and a mother, two and a half, two children, and a dog. And there I was, a refugee, spoke German, with a father slash stepfather, which was already unusual, whom I referred to as and called uncle. That was difficult for neighborhood children to understand and made it difficult for me to move on from the immigrant refugee to an American. And there was one unforgettable incident when a neighborhood bully trapped me, and I thought my life was over. And he said, "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to ask you a question. why do you call your father uncle?
Mhm.
And I went home and asked my mother, why do I call my father uncle? And from that time on, I called him dad.
Ernie, tell us what your early years in Brooklyn, what were they like for you? And we see a picture here from about that time, right?
Yes, about that time. My life consisted of scheming for ways to shed my personality as an immigrant refugee and take on the skin of an American. I realized pretty quickly that the way to be like the other guys, to become one of the kids, was to become a fan of the Brooklyn Dodgers. And I became the biggest, craziest Brooklyn Dodgers fan there was. I calculated batting averages in my head. I taped papers all around my wall with the statistics and the standings. I listened to every minute of every game against the wishes of my stepfather, who knew nothing about and cared nothing about sports of any kind, including baseball. And he would follow me from room to room, saying, "From this you will make a living." And I think it was also important for him to get me to turn off the radio and save the electricity, which would have been important to him as well. But being a baseball fan made me an American. And all these decades later, I have to say, I'm still a crazy baseball fan.
Ernie, you always knew you had a brother. And when you were old enough, you wrote letters to your brother, Manfred. Your mother very much wanted to bring Manfred to the United States and reunite her family, but she didn't see him until after the war. Please tell us about her efforts to try to reunite with Manfred.
Yes, my mother desperately wanted to bring Manfred to be with us. During the actual war years, it would have been a physical impossibility to transport a child across the ocean, but the war ended in 1945. My stepfather strongly opposed the idea of bringing another child into the family. He worked as a laborer in a small factory referred to as a shop in lower Manhattan. He barely made enough money to support the three of us, and he did not want to have Manfred come here to be with us. My mother was distraught about this, and she and her sister Anna spent countless hours theme, thinking about this, talking about this, scheming, strategizing. How can we do this? How can this happen?
Mhm, mhm.
I, as a child who was sick a lot and home a lot from school, would overhear all of this going on, even though some of it was whispering and all of it was in some combination of Yiddish and German. In 1947, when my brother was 13 and was to be bar mitzvahed, my mother saved up the money to go to England and be with Manfred for his bar mitzvah. There she is with Manfred and the foster parents. Her hope was that she would bring Manfred back with her. But the foster parents argued strongly that their life in Manchester, England, was at a much higher level than Manfred's would be in Brighton Beach, Brooklyn. They very much wanted him to stay with them.
Mhm.
He, as a 13-year-old who was seeing his mother the first time since he was 4 years old and hardly remembered her, did not want to be taken away from the parents that he really knew, from his schooling, his friends, his life. And he refused to go. And my mother came home without him.
Ernie, you were, of course, just still a young kid. Did you have any sense of what the impact of that was on your mother?
It's hard for me to remember exactly. It was a time when my life started to be nothing but playing ball out in the streets with the kids,
Mhm.
and I think paying less attention to the family issues. But I can only imagine what this must have been like for her. I was ambivalent about it myself. Perhaps it would have been kind of neat to acquire an older brother. On the other hand, I had a really good thing going as an only child with a doting mother. So I did not get to see and meet the brother I had been corresponding with. We had exchanged letters from the earliest time when I could write childish letters, dear Manfred, how are you? I am fine. And then we would exchange more letters about our lives. And we took to exchanging comic books.
Mm.
And that exchange of comic books, looking back at it, was kind of a reflection of the difference between living in England during the war and living in America. The comic books I sent were the comic books that you would see today in the quality of their paper. I would send him Superman and Captain Marvel and Batman and Archie Andrews and so on. And he would send back paper that was like tissue paper, and there were uh, colored animals who spoke to each other strangely. Um, it was a very strange way of trying to stay in touch, but that's what we did.
But you did. Mm. Ernie, we've had a number of questions and comments come in while you and I have been talking, and many viewers have asked a very similar question about your brother Manfred. One of them, for example, Taylor asked, did you ever reunite with your brother as an adult? And if so, what was that like?
Yes, well, that's the story. It wasn't until 1960, when I was in the second year of law school at Columbia. My mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer. My brother made the decision to come to America and be with her one last time. And that was the way I met him one day in January of 1960. He was there in our bungalow in Brighton Beach. I have vague recollections of a kind of an awkward meeting to say hello. He stayed for perhaps as much as a week, and it was an opportunity for us to start to get to know each other, but it was not a good circumstance in which to do it. We spent most of our time in a hospital room, but at least it was a beginning.
Ernie, as part of that visit from Manfred to your mother, who did pass away um, after he left, he told you that he was going to get married that summer and asked you to come to his wedding. Will you say a little bit about that?
Yes, I very much wanted to take him up on that, and I arranged to fly to London. Not such a simple thing in those days. The only flying I had done in my life to that point was a trip to Boston. The flights across the Atlantic were in planes referred to as jet props. A little bit of jet and mostly propellers. I remember that trip. It was a difficult 28-hour trip with several stops, loud and bumpy. But I got to London, and I was able to be at Manfred and Jess's wedding. I was one of two people on Manfred's side. There was a cousin from Israel who was there as well. So they were the two of us, and Jessica's enormous extended family. So again, another meeting, not a very good way to try to get to know him again with the day or so and few hours before his wedding, but it was the second time we met. Um, I went off to bum around Europe and came back when they returned from their honeymoon and spent some more time. And again, had a little more of an opportunity to get to know my brother.
We have a kind of an apropos question that's just come in from a viewer named Megan, and Megan asks, do you get to see your brother often? And that just it fits nicely with what I would have asked you, and that is to note that you have developed over the years this deep, loving bond between not just the two of you, but between your families, despite there being an ocean between us. So, taking off with Megan's question about have you gotten to see each other often, tell us more about your relationship with Manfred.
Yes, it was, of course, a wonderful question. Manfred went to work for Exxon, which was known as Esso in those years. Exxon had its refineries in New Jersey and in Houston. And Manfred's job gave him many opportunities to come visit the refineries. And every time he did, he stopped to see me. When I finished law school, went to work for an international company, which gave me an opportunity to attend many meetings in Europe. And each time I did, I stopped to see Manfred. Each of us had frequent opportunities to do this. And we started to joke that we probably see each other more frequently than some brothers who live across town from each other. All these visits gave us an opportunity to develop a remarkably close and loving relationship. Many of the times we were together included our families. We would try to bring families along to family events at the other side of the ocean. So they got to know each other well. And I often say that it was remarkable how close we came, having missed a childhood together. One person once said to me, maybe it was because you missed a childhood together, which is an interesting thought.
When you described that first time meeting him when he came over because of your mother's illness, you were 21 years old at that point, and so that had been a very, very long time. But just this past November 2024, you, your wife, and children traveled to England for Manfred's 90th birthday. Tell us about that.
Oh, we had looked forward for some time to the 90th birthday celebration. My wife and I and two of our kids managed to be present for the event. It took place in a part of London that was walking distance from the Liverpool Street train station, which you see here. That station was the landing point for all the kinder transports. And from that station, the children were sent off to various locations around Europe and around London. The sculpture is a poignant recollection of what it must have been like for those Holocaust children. And that picture of Manfred coming back to that station with me is a picture that I absolutely prize.
Ernie, before I move to my last question for you today, I do want you to tell us about the toast that you made at Manfred's birthday, this 90th birthday last November.
Yes. I said how miraculous it was that two Jewish boys born in Vienna in 1934 and 1938 would be alive to celebrate this 90th birthday.
Ernie, I have just one more question for you, and that is, as we face a dangerous surge of anti-Semitism, please tell us why you feel it is important to share your firsthand account of the Holocaust and what all of us can learn from it.
Unfortunately, anti-Semitism has come back to a level that I never thought I would see in my lifetime. My story is only one of a million stories, but they're all important. It's urgent that those of us who can still tell these stories get them out to the next generation and the generation after that. It's important that history be remembered and the Holocaust be remembered, and that people understand what can result from hatred and discrimination. We need to recognize and stand up to the things around us that are so hurtful. History tells us that terrible things can happen and have happened. We all need to remember these stories.
Ernie, thank you for that. Thank you for those closing words today. Thank you for being our first person. Thank you for sharing what was a story that comes about only because of hatred and discrimination and all the terrible things that your family experienced. And I guess there's this one silver lining in all of it, and that is this amazing relationship that you and your brother and your families have been able to form in the aftermath of the Holocaust. So thank you for being our first person, Ernie.
It was a privilege, Bill. Thank you.
I'd like to take just a moment to thank our donor. First Person is made possible through the generous support of the Lewis Franklin Smith Foundation. And I'd also like to invite you to join us again in June for our next, in July for our next First Person program. Thanks for being with us, and thanks for spending this hour with Ernie Brod.